All right, we're live. Hopefully my mic is good, everybody. I had to use the camera mic, so I'm not using my regular mic. I'm using my camera mic. So hopefully the audio is sufficient. We're back here on the Space Water Podcast. Of course, my name is Castaldo, and this is Exploring the Ka on YouTube. Even though we're demonetized, we're still going strong. I actually made a decision. Me and my wife both thought it was a good decision to stay demonetized and keep this a free channel where there's no ads and we can just offer our content. And if you want to support my channel, you can also go to themysticalspiral.com and there's a PayPal link there if you want to donate. You can also join my Patreon, patreon.com/themysticalspiral. Or you can also go to my store, themysticalspiralstore.com. Now let's get down to business, everybody. Also, stay with us today. After Gary Wayne, our guest today, is on, I'm gonna stay live about 15 or 20 minutes or so, maybe even longer, to do my own little podcast after Gary's on. So, people, if you want to stay with us in the chat room, that's great. If you're here just for Gary Wayne, then that's cool. You guys can leave after the chat room. But we got Gary Wayne in the house. This is episode 42. Of course, if you're new to the channel, Gary Wayne is a Christian contrarian. He's a world-renowned best-selling author of his Genesis 6 conspiracy series. I've been interviewing Gary for nearly 10 years now, and it's always a pleasure to spend some time with him. And unfortunately, we weren't able to connect the last shows that we were supposed to do, but we got Gary here today. Even though it's a snowy day, we're going to give the heat today. So we got a very interesting conversation. Since it's winter solstice today, we are going to bring the heat about some of the origins of Santa Claus, Christmas, Father Christmas, the wheel of and cycles of time. And it's going to be a very interesting discussion. And who knows where we're going to go. Gary, thank you for sitting there listening to me for a few minutes. I really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us today and sharing your knowledge. It's great to be here on winter solstice.
Yes, so thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here to talk about a few things and connect some dots, hopefully with your audience, and wishing all a very Merry Christmas and the best in the new year. And I think people are really going to find today's show rather eye-opening.
I think so. I think our shows over the years have really grown popular because we're an interesting mix. And somewhere along the line, we end up, tying it together off very often rather than not.
We do, and that's the important thing about not being in sort of group thought. Um, And
Yeah,
it's important to have your own belief systems and do your own research. But if you want to learn more, then you have to be able to listen to other information and you have to be able to debate and you have to sort of look at the veracity of what other people are saying, and then you start to put those things together. So I think what happens is we push the envelope from both sides at times, and we create a better understanding for the world that we live in and the world that was, and a little bit more of a clearer picture of the world to come.
that's well put. Yeah. So you over in Canada, are you I mean, it's very interesting how the solstice, the change of seasons, the doorways that open with Christmas and the new sun being born and all this lore, and now we're getting all this UFO drone
Yeah.
activity. Is there stuff like that happening in Canada as well?
Yeah, it doesn't typically get reported as much, but
Because I
if you
know we're
if
in
you
New York, New Jersey here. We're getting pounded
oh
with it
yeah,
right
you
now.
guys are in a hot spot right now for sure. There is a lot more UAP, UFO, extraterrestrial, however you want to label it, activity in Canada that gets than what gets reported. And if people are really sort of into that genre or that sort of research, they might find it surprising how much Canada pops up in terms of sightings and related topics. But what's going on in the U.S. today is rather interesting. Have to wait and see how it comes about. But whatever it is, again, what we do know is they're not telling us the truth and they're lying to us. So if we sort of start with that premise that that's what they do when their lips start to move from the government, they're lying. We need to be able to look at what we see with our own eyes and start to analyze it from other sources, but not sort of try and get it into a speculation level that would not fit the details that are there, let's say. And so to be as realistic in our analysis as possible. So what we do know about what's going on there today is this is not only over military sites, but also in multiple states as it's coming to some sort of crescendo or increasing in its intensity. And that the government, if they do know what it is, and I think they probably do to a certain degree, and a lot more than certainly what they're saying, they're not doing anything about it. So that only says one of two possibilities. Because
Yeah,
if they were legal drones, they wouldn't be in those spots and they'd
yeah,
be taken down. If they were illegal drones in that spot, they would be taken down.
yeah,
And there's like four or five agencies that have the authority to do that, and they wouldn't be worrying about saying, "Oh, well, we're afraid of the debris might hurt people." That's just absolutely nonsense. So the two things that you start to focus in on is that they don't have an ability to take it down because the technology is beyond our technology, or they're in constant communication, and whether or not the US government wants to be compliant or willingly compliant or joint in whatever that they're doing, that is what is going on. So it could be so many different things
yeah,
from within that spectrum, from the creation of new type of technology with angelic help,
yeah,
right? Or alien help, depending on how you want to view that sort of perspective. Or this is the extraterrestrials or fallen angels, demons, the whole elementals, the whole sort of spectrum that you could get into it that are trying to exert their power and influence in a way that doesn't cause any harm at this point, but are basically saying change your direction or else.
yeah,
So, I mean, you're down to a few possibilities, but none of them are all that good.
yeah. What if even like say they were supposedly the drones are looking for lost radioactive material or something like that. But what if that radioactive material was sort of even stolen by our government for a ruse? So the majority of the people think that's what they're looking for when a step above is they're a little bit
Yeah.
higher than the drone, something else
Yeah.
is taking place.
Yeah, that's what I think. And if they're kind of a drone, who's operating them and from
Yeah,
where? So, and then it also coincides with the same type of thing that's going on in the military and naval or Air Force base in England right now and has been. So there's a consistency to the approach. And it's amazing, but of course we don't have proper media anymore. So I mean, they're at least covering it, but they're not asking any of the right questions because they don't want to.
yeah. And you and I, like I said earlier, we've been doing shows damn near 10 years together. And I think we've made it clear that we both agree that we we feel that, and I think people by now should be, it'd be foolish for them not to think that it's most likely that the UFO activity is a spiritual in nature, no matter what religion you believe.
Yeah, it's part of that hierarchy.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And it affects us spiritually, you know. So if you're
yeah.
Christian or a Muslim, I mean, however you want to believe it, it's spiritual related to this planet and what's transpiring. I fully believe that.
Yep. And denying the existence of this stuff is just putting your head in the sand
Yep.
because whatever it is, whatever you and people are free to believe and conclude whatever these beings are and entities that control this type of technology. Um, what we do know is there's way too many that are unexplainable and probably three-quarters of what they explain away is nonsense. And the reasons are just absolutely the worst piece of BS that you could ever put out for propaganda as to try and make them go away. But no matter what, with a certain amount, they just can't make it go away. And when you've got now things coming out from the Congress with which we've all known that the Air Force and members of the military are saying when we're tracking these things, they are way beyond our technology. And when we see them, when we send out jets and fighter planes and stuff like that, we're no match for them. It is, and they have no idea what it is. I think they do, but what it is classified, and they won't release that. And it's classified because they're either complicit or they're in total fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I mean that totally leads into the topic that we're saying. Do you think that is sort of the origins of some of these mythologies even that we have? Because like you have Santa Claus who comes in from the North Pole, right? And
Yeah.
he seems to be controlling these magical beings and elves and all of this. And it sounds very similar, when you got, these glowing beings that come down and they're casting their magic upon the population, right? And
Yeah, it is related. It is related because we're talking about similar kinds of technology and knowledge, um, and that we're talking about similar kinds of beings. And from I would say, pure polytheist perspective and a pure monotheist perspective, these beings are gods or fallen angels at the top of the hierarchy. And I'm going to link that very quickly. And then you have the various levels of that hierarchy of the spiritual ones, and then you have the visible ones that has its own internal hierarchy. And in this, we see a number of figures in what you're using with Santa Claus or Odin in this case, from the Germanic and Norse version, that is dealing with the dark elves and other people within the elemental groups
yeah,
that are is fused into this mythos of Christmas from a Norse sort of perspective, and Christmas would be sort of loosely said in that case as overlaid into the ancient polytheist belief system. So now you're getting UAPs with Santa Claus's chariot,
yeah, right. Well,
basically.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, Santa Claus seems to be some sort of like goblin type being in charge of the elves, right? And he's very closely related, like with reindeer that are antlered, these
Yeah.
antlered beings,
Yeah.
right?
So,
So
so,
what is there? Do you consider that a
oh,
connection to witchcraft right there?
oh, it's absolutely taciturn imagery
Yeah,
to disguise the true nature. So when we look at when Santa comes, in this case, over, and we'll use with the Norse and sticking with Odin because it's just going to fit so much better as we take that elsewhere. Um, this is the time of Yule, which is the eighth holiest Sabbath on the wheel worship of the giants. So there's going to be a relationship here again, and that starts on the solstice, even though Saturna, which is also intermixed in your starts on the 17th. So you've got a period that goes right from the 17th to January 2nd and even to January 3rd, all interrelated with these ancient sort of celebrations. So when we look at Odin, one of his names is um, uh, Yolnir, from the Yolnar
yeah, that's
gods,
right. Yeah.
right? And
Oh wow, that
Yol,
comes right from Yule. Yes.
yeah, and that's how we get transliterated as Yule. Now, he is a horn god, Odin. And that's very, very important because other gods like Cernunnos and Cern are also horn gods and pan gods. So this now is starting, and Odin is the chief god of the post-Diluvian Norse pantheon. And an unexplained horn god, just as you have these other horn gods that are so very important in the pantheons, but unexplained. They're not really part of the normal hierarchy. And so Santa is also known, and I mean, Santa Odin is also known as a definition of that as being father. Okay, so as in Father Christmas, or as the Yule one. So this is the solstice one. This is the Father one. This
Yeah. The
is
Holly
right.
King.
He's the Holly King.
Yeah.
Exactly, he's the Holly King, or the Oak
Yeah.
King is the same sort of allegory.
Huh.
And that's how it starts to start back. It starts to weave its way back into the same celebrations and gods in the Druidic pantheon, right? Through the Holly King, which
Yeah.
is very, very important. And so the 12 days of Christmas starts on December 21. Some people might move that to December 19. It's still in and around it, and the 12 days will go to December 31st or January 2nd, depending on which one you're doing. So that's the 12 days of Odin's hunt.
Hmm.
So again, all the things that go with Yule time, which is now understood as Odin or the horn god.
Wow.
This is and as a solar god
Yeah.
with the solstice,
Yeah.
and also known as the Winter King. Right? It's another allegory as you tie into the Druidic and the Norse pantheons in together.
Which we've
And that,
pointed out in other shows for people listening that goes back to the Aryan Solar Kings as well, you know? Yeah.
yeah. So now you have this Father Christmas, as we would mix the monotheist in with the polytheist. Um, and it was known in Greek as Ios Vasilios, as the old man or the white bearded one who had a red cape. same
Wow.
period same period of time for this solstice celebration that would also overlap into a couple of days into the new year and the New Year's celebrations coming from the Greek uh, tradition. So now you have, if you can imagine Santa Claus as being the chief god of the post-Diluvian or an alternative chief god of the post-Diluvian, or maybe they're one and the same. It's hard to know. But typically they're depicted differently. One's being like a goat god, and one's being like a serpentine god. So I think there is a distinction. It could be a degradation, serpent down to goat, but that's a different rabbit hole. So, but he's riding in this sleigh and he's flying in the air. Now, this is very, very similar to in the Greek tradition where you have Zeus, parent god of the offspring gods, and Apollo, part of the Olympian post-Diluvian gods, and the other gods are having their chariots pulled by white horses, and in the older tradition, horned unicorns. So, and they're all gods. These are the chariots of the gods, as the ancient alien mythos ties in as this type of
Yeah.
angelic technology, right? But these are gods versus aliens in terms of how I would perceive it. Just how far you want to raise that intelligence and being to is the distinction. And the reindeers are horned just like the unicorns are. Now in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, and also as it's recording into the book of Psalms, God's chariot is pulled by cherubim. And as I write about in book two, unicorns in the angelic being is an allegory for the knowledge that comes through the single horn of the unicorn from the angelic being through the third eye to the people in the physical world of a special kind of knowledge. And so this is clearly an imagery with the reindeer being an allegory for cherubim again, just as the unicorn is. So now you have a whole bunch of different things that are being overlaid into here. And this is just the start of the Yuletide. And so Father
Yeah.
Odin has a white side to the mythos and a dark side to the mythos, let alone how it gets back to Lord Maitreya and Mithras, because it does. But that's maybe we'll get there a little bit later.
Yeah,
So
we'll get there to it for sure because Mithras has like the same date. Yeah.
yeah, and we'll get there. Just I'll just tease people as one of the things is Chris Kringle is German for Christ
Oh,
child.
yeah, let's get into Chris Kringle. Do you think that because some I've heard like people talk about that's the Christ connection and Christmas with that
Yes,
Chris Kringle.
it is because I mean that's exactly how it is translated, right? As
Christian,
Christ
but
child
would
or
Christian
Christ kind
would
or
would
or
most Christians be open to that?
yeah. No, They don't
They
understand the
wouldn't.
connections.
Yeah.
And the actual one isn't really Christ's child. That's how it's been interpreted. It actually means Christ kind or Christ
Oh,
consciousness. And so that becomes important because you have
that's
uh,
the
an
yeah, yeah. That's it. Yes, that's
you have an
Chris Kringle, Christ
yeah,
consciousness.
yes.
Oh, so that's so Gnostic version of wow.
Yeah, and so who is also born on Christmas Day? Mithra is
Yeah. He's supposed to be
December
born in a
25.
cave, right? Light from a cave.
Yeah, so we'll probably come back to that a little bit more down the road, but
Yeah.
understand the levels of
Wow.
allegory that is being overlaid on some of this stuff. And Santa Claus has the white beard, like Father Christmas and the chief god out of the Greek mythology, has a red suit. Um, and also, when we look at the German Norse versions, we have a character called Krampus, which is the dark side to it. And it's all telling the same side, just
Yeah.
using different sort of motivations and arriving to the same end. So
You've seen those
Krampus,
Krampus parades, Gary?
yeah, I have. This
Yeah.
is weird. This is weird stuff. So
Yeah.
this is from these are it's the Father Christmas from the ancient origins, and he's understood as the horned god, Krampus is, of witches, right? So, and he's the Holly King. He is the Winter King, Krampus, as it's understood. And in the Germanic uh, understanding and tradition, Krampus is equated with the devil, but typically you could also use that as a Satan for one of the Satans underneath Satan, as this as
Oh,
Book of Enoch
what about
talks
I'm
about
sorry,
Satans.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, okay, and just finishing with Chris Kringle, he has, goat horns, cloven hooves, fangs, and a long tongue and hairy. I mean, he's very much in this sort of tradition, and also depicted with chains just as Azazel is a goat god that's chained. So you start to see more imagery come through. And on Christmas Eve, he goes through the streets with his dark elves as opposed to the white elves. And the dark elves are evil elves. These are part of the elemental groups that look uh, after certain specific agendas for the occult world. And these dark elves do not like humankind, but they're there to capture children. And they'll leave a lump of coal for the ones who are naughty, and they're going to leave the nice ones. So naughty and nice, that is interwoven in here as well. And they're going to take them to Hades or Hell or Valhalla, whichever terms you want to use, where they're going to eat those children. So this is a very, very dark side of it that is sort of overlaid, and you have this sort of interesting sort of thing with this understanding of these uh, elementals, which are spurious offspring in the hierarchy of the fallen angels, like the white elves, which would be an allegory for the giants. But Santa Claus comes in through the chimney somehow with an offering that's set down in front of the fireplace. And that's providing an invitation or an inviting in of these spirits. So you could imply it's like an allegory of demons can't come into you unless they're permitted or invited, or you create a way for them to do it. And so let's say in the vampire literature, Dracula and those vampires aren't permitted to come in even through the windows unless you invite them in. That's the same
Yeah.
type of allegory, right? So now you've invited them in to come down the chimney and you've got an offering for them. We see it as milk and cookies, but when we're talking about making some of these offerings like to the Queen of Heaven, it could be like cakes or flat cakes, as it would have been in
Yeah.
ancient times. And The milk, is it? It could be an offering representing something of the mother god there, or it could be another drink, and they're just using the milk as
You know,
being an allegory for whatever would be the other part of the offering there.
yeah, you know what they do in us as young Italians, what we did. And I told my daughter about it too. I don't know if she remembers when we did it when I told her about it when she was little. I asked her yesterday, but it was actually done on January 6th. We would they called Befana, La Befana, who's like she's the queen of witches, and you were supposed to leave like a stocking on the fireplaces on January 6th and say a prayer to the Befana and get gifts in the stockings. So that's what Italian families do in Italy, and even some Italian American families, they still do it today.
And who is the gifts for in the stockings?
Befana, B, it's
For
spelled,
oh, to the for the witch.
yeah, Befana.
Okay.
Yep, her
Yeah,
name's
so again,
Befana.
now we have those stockings over that fireplace,
Yep.
uh, which is part of
It,
the
it's
tradition
spelled it's
as well.
spelled
So,
Befana, Befana. Yeah.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and this is just sort of the beginning of the allegories, but so when you see the Krampus thing, understand that is the same story and the same end. It's just you have this nicer white style of allegory with the sanitized Santa Claus versus um, Krampus.
So
Um,
what do you think about the Santa being an anagram for Satan?
it certainly you could look at it that way from an English perspective, not
Yeah.
necessarily from the older languages,
Oh,
though.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be from the
Yeah.
English. What's the actual
But
date on Santa Claus? Is it from the 1800s or is it much older?
from it's much
It's
older.
Christmas, right? It's
Yeah,
much older
yeah.
because it's just were we
So
actually calling it Santa Claus though before the 1800s?
Saint Nicholas would have been sort of the
Yeah.
trans
Okay.
and and that was a saint in Roman Catholic history, and he used to give gifts to children on
Yeah.
um, on in that period, but it wasn't around December 25. It was starting in about December 6th for a week or so in early December, and it was Henry VIII who moved it to the same timing as the winter festivals of polytheism. So again, you have a royale making that change, and one who probably does it deliberately
Huh.
because he's the one who is going to create the Anglican Church and part from the Roman Catholic Church. So there's a lot of politics and control moves that are being entered in there. So he moved it from December 6th to December 25, the feast day of St. Nicholas. And again, you have Santa Claus having, kind of a relationship to the name St. Nicholas. So it's you're frozen up there, Ross. So I don't know whether we're still okay. No, you're just looking down. Okay, just thought maybe we lost the feed or thought. So
Sorry, I was looking at the chat room.
yeah, so there's a similar spelling as you get there from Saint Nicholas to Santa Claus. So like Nicholas, you have Claus at the end, and so Saint Claus or Santa Claus, right? Santa being probably more of a Spanish name for saint. So or European derivative as well. So you can see how they can also overlay that. And so when you also see now with all of these overlays and sort of feeding into a polytheist period from beginning of Saturna to about January 2nd or January 3rd, it's a worldwide polytheist important time of the Sabbath. Um, but you also have the holidays. Now you could look at that as coming out of the etymology as holy days, right? But because we understand if you've studied polytheism, they have many names and allegories to those terms. So this would be the time of the Holy King of Odin or Cernunnos, which would be the holy days, as in the 12 days of the hunt of the Holy King.
Wow.
So again, they've overlaid those types of things on there as well. And so when we look at that holly term, I mean, Hollywood is the wood used for magic wands.
Yeah, the sacred woods too. That's even the Lake Nemi, this the grove. of Lake Nemi is
Yeah.
that's where they get the name from the Holy Woods,
Yeah.
Hollywood. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And of
You
course,
can
this
see
is
that
a
in
na
the Golden Bow. James Fraser has that in this book, the
wow.
Golden Bow. Yeah, it's a really good book.
Yeah. And of course, this is from the nature gods, right? The green man, right? That's related into all of these things. And the holly tree has thorny leaves, and they would make boughs out of that or wreaths out of that. And so, again, the superficial Christian part is, well, that's like the thorn crown of Christ that he was put on during the Passover crucifixion. And so, but that's not the same sort
Yeah,
of Christian type of celebration. It's a different date.
it
But
just
this is so,
it's unfortunate that a lot of these things get pulled into Christianity
yes,
and it get
yes.
adopted by it.
Yeah, and
You
we
know?
think it's Christian, but we're
Yeah.
allowing worship and rituals
Yep.
within our churches, within our houses, that sort of all represent this polytheist ritual and things, which is the thing we want to be careful of. And so this holly wreath would be like the laurel crown. The laurel crown is the from the branches of the laurel tree in Greek mythology that turned into a crown of branches from the laurel tree. So it has a kinship to these horns. But this is the crown, as in Stephanos, as in the Antichrist, with the crown that he's going to carry as he comes in the end time in Revelation 6, and a bow, a simple cloth. So the white cloth of the gods that they would wear, or the kings of the ancient time, as he rides out on the horses. But the laurel tree was used to make the crown for the kings and for the gods. That's the crown that they wore. So it's a horn crown.
I mean, it's so true, Gary. What you're saying is it's powerful because think about it. You have materialistic beliefs getting infiltrated. It's like Lucifer's sword getting stuck into it. Right?
Yeah,
You have certain Christian belief systems, and then you have all of this materialistic, wrap it up with fancy gift wrap and let it be shiny and expensive
yeah,
and open up a doorway
yeah.
in your house so we can come through the portal with our fairies and leave you magical gifts. Like, oh my, it's really incredible. And
Yeah,
I've heard him even be called I don't know if it's German or Dutch, but it's Pels Nickel, which means like a furry Nicholas,
yep.
which is very similar to like an Enkidu or
Sure
something.
it is. Sure it is.
Yeah,
Because these gods are hairy too, right?
yeah.
Just like as their offspring were hairy. Yeah. So this is part of the whole allegories that sort of link into Christmas. And I mentioned earlier, and we could talk about mistletoe too, just sort of quickly. I mean, it's from the Druids and the Norse side, and mistletoe would provide magical power, and sometimes could provide good luck. And it is was used as an amulet to ward off evil spirits. Now, what's important about that is probably the second or third, depending on who you're talking to, the most prominent night of the demons is Christmas Eve. Just as only likely Sam Hen would have more demons crossing over at that time. So now you have this mistletoe thing that's overlaid onto Christmas because you have all of these evil spirits coming through, and that starts to connect into stealing the children in the Krampus mythos,
Yeah, that's
right?
crazy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of this sort of is interesting. And another thing that's really interesting is Saturnus is a week long. So it starts December 17th, it ends December 24th. And then on December 25 is the uh, is the birth date of Mithras in Mithraism and Zoroastrianism. And as you know, as we've done many shows on Zoroastrian, is the religion of the Indo-Aryans and the giants right after the flood. So now you have even more weird sort of connections as you transition, as it's part of the days of this horn god. So what's also interesting is that we have Templars who worshipped a horn god, a head, and they called it Baphomet. Well, that means Father Mithra, a horn god. And we also know they understood that they received their knowledge, and the god that they worshiped the most was Azazel, who is degraded to a goat god. And so now we have more connections that sort of leap into more modern times of how this mythos continues to exist with us. And you have the word Mithra in Sanskrit, meaning and Sanskrit would be an Indo-Aryan language as well, as you and I have talked about on many shows. And Mithra means an alliance or a covenant um, in Sanskrit and or Indo-Aryan, meaning both, and that Cern means a horn god, a horn-headed god in Indo-Aryan, could be Kern as well,
Yeah.
Kern, and pronounced and transliterated both down through history. Antichrist is the one who creates the covenant of death in Daniel 9:27 for the end time. Mithra is the God who comes back at the end of an age as an incarnation, as a Chris Crindle sort of
Wow.
incarnation, right?
Uh,
Um, and he is also known as, and he comes back at the end of the age and then is there for the start of the age. So very much equivalent to the Shiva god or destroyer god, which is equivalent to the Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon god of the Bible, and or angel of the Bible. And so this individual, Lord Maitreya, is an allegory for the coming Antichrist, as Alice Bailey and many other occultists say, begins in about 2025.
yeah, the celestial
Yeah.
hierarchy that's returning.
Yeah. And Lord Maitreya is Lord Mithra and his incarnation as a Christ consciousness, as they say that he's going to be coming. And so all of this gets overlaid on the so-called birthday of Christ, which isn't the birthday of Christ. And we know that from the details in the Bible. And so we could talk about that, or we could continue a little bit further down on this. I know I'm throwing out a lot of details.
Yeah,
So
we could go. I mean, what do you think about possibly the birthday of Christ being in July?
I would say more September to early October.
Yeah,
Yeah. So July
because
from a weather basis makes some sense,
yeah,
but not from the details from the Bible. So how we get there sort of biblically is through the details of John the Baptist and his father Zechariah, and how he was part of a special tribe of Abiyah, which did certain rituals at certain times of the weeks, and then also double duty on the feasts of the Lord. And with his interruption, and of course he couldn't speak for a while, as you get the detailing coming down in the book of Luke about John the Baptist, and then as that relates to Jesus. So that's going to place his error is timing of when he would not be working in the temple at that time, and with the pregnancy happening of John the Baptist somewhere after the end of May and maybe into early July. And so the consensus date is March 11th or in around that area for the birth of John the Baptist. And then 6 months later or so, so if it's a little bit beyond that, you could get 6 months past September 11th and into maybe as if you really pushed it into early October. So what's interesting about placing the birth date there is that the details of the birth of Christ comes with the time of the census, and that when Joseph and Mary go to Bethlehem, because of the census, there's no room in the hotel, but there's room in the stable. The problem with that in December is that's the rainy season. So the rainy season, you would have all of the animals, the domesticated animals, in this case, the sheep and the goats and whatever else in the herds, would be all in the stable. So there wouldn't be room in the stables. And the angels come announcing the birth of Christ to the shepherds in the field. So they have to be in the field when it's not the rainy season. So again, you're getting pushed back. You could push that back to July from that perspective, but it doesn't quite align with some of the other details as it relates to John the Baptist's birth, who makes the way for Jesus. So what we do agree on is for sure is the birthday is not December 25. And that's instituted by Constantine in the 300s to uh, to commemorate the birth. And of course, Constantine merged Mithraism and Christianity to form the state-sponsored religion. So again, you get a date that would fit perfectly into the polytheist celebrations by Constantine with establishing Christianity, and then saying, well, we need a date to honor Christ anyways, and this is the date that we're going to pick. They just don't tell us why they picked that date. And Constantine also move the Sabbath with the obviously the support of the new church to do that from Saturday to Sunday, which is the day of Sol Invictus, which also runs in that same period of time.
Yeah, I mean, Mithras is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, even with Persian and it's a sun god and in
Yeah,
Vedic as well. You know, Mitra, I think is the name in Vedic, Mitra.
yeah,
You know, and then even the Mitanni and all the tribes worshipped Mithra as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
You know,
exactly. So very,
yeah.
very important god. And Sol
And then
Invictus,
do you think it got into Christianity when it was introduced into Rome? Because I know in Rome it was
yeah,
like it was going along Christianity for a while.
yeah, and that's what happens with Constantine. So in 335 AD, Constantine, who has created Christianity as the state religion, and mixed in Mithraism, which was the most popular, along with Sol Invictus, of religions in Rome at that time, um, were merged together. So Sunday, which is the day of of the sun god, and Saturna and Sol Invictus, that's all part of that imagery that's being put in. So yeah, in and Sol Invictus is also a festival that starts on December 25, because they're really talking Sol Invictus and Mithraism as, different sects of that same religion in that, that is based in Zoroastrianism in Persia and elsewhere. And so yeah, so you had there had the both the Sunday and Christmas being changed as part of uniting the empire. So I think that's where you get the real start of this as and the official on Julius the First 350 declared December 25 the official date. So you had to start with Constantine, and then Julius entrenches it within the Roman Empire.
People loving the conversation in the chat room. Well, welcome Zaralath and everybody else that just joining in there. Chloe, everybody, thank you. We got 36 people listening today so far, Gary. And if you guys are just joining with us, of course we got the one and only Gary Wayne from Genesis 6 Conspiracy. His website is genesis6conspiracy.com and he has two books in the series. Yeah, Gary, we also have in Italy very similar to um like in I guess in Italian mysticism they use very similar to the wheel of the eight wheel. They call them
Yeah.
the treguenda.
Yeah.
Treguendas, the eight treguendas. Then
Yeah.
they're like the winter solstices, the different, spring equinox, Beltane, all the different days.
Yeah, so the best way to understand that, and there will be different names around the
Yeah,
world.
all
Typically,
different
we
names.
get the more of the Druidic and the Norse ones. So, um, but they're all on the same dates and the same periods, and they're usually running for a couple of weeks or at least a week. And so you have eight. They're split this way. Four for split into two for the equinoxes and the solstices, which everybody recognizes in the seasons. And then in between at the 6 week point, you have another special holiday. So Samhain follows 6 weeks after September 21 of the equinox. And in February 1st to about the 14th or so, 15th or so, you've got Lupercalis and Valentine's Day and all of those festivals. 6 weeks after the March equinox, you're going to have the May Day festivals. And then there's another one that falls in October or August 1st, the end of July into early August, that's also celebrated. And there's a lot of holidays around the world that are put in at for the first weekend of August in a lot of places like in Canada. So understand that these are eight and they're in a form of a wheel. And the wheel worship is a very important understanding of the imagery that comes out of polytheism. So this is a cycle and a wheel that continues to turn. And that when they worshiped on pilgrimages, they would worship in a circuit or a wheel. And they would go to certain sites throughout the year on their pilgrimages. And it's sort of similar to how judges were set up on a circuit. And so it's this wheel culture is also understood in the procession of time into the great ages. This wheel is also understood as coming out of the chariot wheel and part of the throne gods aspect or the Ophanim. Just as wheel is Gilgal in Hebrew, and for the throne gods, the Ophanim, it also means wheel and but specifically used in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10 for the wheel angels versus the wheels that are concentric and going intermixing amongst each other. That would be Gilgal. One of these famous sites for a wheel site would be Gilgal Raphaim at the foot of Mount Hermon. And but anywhere in the world where you have a branch of polytheism, they're going to have these ancient holy sites that were set up in circles, as well as other special alignments to represent things in the sky. So this is a very, very important concept that goes 1,000 different ways, so to speak, in polytheism.
So this is the wheel of Italian mysticism that some people use. In the middle you see is the what they call the Chimaruta. It's the sprig of the rue, and it's their mystical amulet. And then this is the eight spokes wheel that you were speaking of. They have different names like May
Yep,
1st is on the bottom here. That would be May 1st, Tana's Day.
yep,
And then Lupercus is the like the February.
yep. It would be Imbolic in the Druidic and Norse.
Yep. That would be like the Lupercalia,
Yep,
all the time. And then you got the spring equinox, you got cornucopia, autumn equinox, the shadow
yep,
fest, and winter solstice.
yep. And it's a constant, worldwide constant. And that just cannot be a coincidence.
And this could also be contributed, I mean, and linked to the wheels of the giants, like in Gilgal Raphaim. It could be
Yes,
linked to the cycle of year and specific stars.
yes. And you can bet that it likely was because their level of intertwining of the host of heaven and astronomical alignments with things on Earth is absolutely incredible. And they show it in so many different ways. So yeah. And there's also thought to be over 100 domens at Gilgal Raphaim. And if you don't not familiar with what that means, Raphaim is a Hebrew word that means giant. So this is the wheel of the giants, or it could also mean wheel of the spirits. And both went back through in portals in the ancient times to Hades or Sheol and the other names for the other world and the underworld um, quite regularly in the Ugaritic texts.
Yeah, I think it also what's the original name of it? It means something like the Wheel of the Wildcats or something, right?
Though that's another
Another-
translation for it, but typically wildcats in the ancient tradition was demon-possessed people.
Yeah,
So,
wow. Wow. Yeah, so that you guys can see definitely just the similarities between the wheel here
yep,
and the wheel of the year, the
yeah.
wheel of the year here.
And then look at the concentric circles of the typical depiction of Atlantis.
Very true. Very true.
It's a very, very important thing. And just as you have that circle that's also used in the imagery of Samhain.
Yeah. And many Hindu and Vedic temples have the chariot wheels on them
Yep.
and the wheel of the sun of
Yep.
of
Yep.
many people.
And then typically the image would have, and I'll just put this up just to like which is the one that's kind of downloaded from the internet. It has in the middle there the sun, and then you have all of these spokes coming out like
Yep.
stars.
Yep.
So everything in there
Zeus
has
even used that.
meanings. Pardon me?
Zeus even used that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at things like the sun disk between two horns, that would be what this would be depicting as well. It's the same type of imagery, and you get an interesting name in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, where the Rephaim live, the ones of the Ugaritic text and of the Bible, I would say. And in there you get uh, Kernaim, Ashtaroth as the home city of where the Rephaim are living, and that's Karen in Hebrew, and Ashtaroth, the female goddess consort to both Baal and his father El, who created giants. And this is in Mount Hermon, where King Og rules from Ashtaroth and Edrei. And those are the two most important holy cities mentioned of the Baalim in the Ugaritic text. You can't make this up. So when you have these, and it means the dual horns or double horns of Ashtaroth, of the
Wow.
Queen of Heaven, and in that you have the sun disk and the two horns, which is seen throughout the world as part of the imagery.
That's incredible. My daughter,
And oh, and just let me before I forget, Karnaim is the
the
Hebrew
womb.
male plural for Karen, which has its etymological root to Kern and
Yeah,
CERN in Indo-Aryan.
I think it also can mean like I because the original name of the town is the Astaroth Kwarnaim, right? I think it
Yeah,
means like the womb of Astaroth or something like that.
the horns of Ashtaroth.
Oh, the horns? I
Yeah,
thought
the
sometimes it could
dual
mean the
horn. Well,
womb as well.
while you could take that as a fertility goddess as part of
Yeah.
the imagery, I was referring to the specific Hebrew
Oh,
definition.
wow, the horns of Astaroth. That's incredible too. I never looked at it that way. I've always looked at it as the womb of Astaroth.
Yeah.
That's
So,
incredible. My
be,
daughter, she watches this cartoon, Teen Titans.
yeah.
And
Oh, wow.
right? It's the
Yeah.
Teen Titans. It's from
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
Robin, Batman's Robin's in it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's some other characters, but there's one character called Raven, right?
Yeah.
And she's a witch, and her magic thing that she always says is Astaroth, Zetrion, Minthos.
Yeah.
She says those words to cast her spells.
Yeah.
And one of his Astaroth. That's the first
Yeah.
letter. I was like, oh, I couldn't believe it when I was watching it. I was like, wow.
Yeah. And what's interesting as well is the ancient religion as it emerges in all cultures around the world, both before and after the flood of polytheism, was the ancient bull worshipping sun cult. And again, that's where you make these connections, the two horns of the bulls. And the bulls were allegories that were used for the gods and their spurious offspring. And so it can be for the mother goddesses as well. Yeah, so Ashtaroth would be considered a female fertility goddess in the same understanding where that fertility would sort of be interrelated on that, but also a bull goddess. And we get that as being imagery that you can sort of almost reach out and touch in two different ways. So not only like all the Baalim, like Molech and Baal were considered bull gods, but also a fertility goddess in Sumeria, just as Ashtaroth is a fertility goddess, and all the names associated with those queens of heaven, and there's a lot. Um, and that there's a specific one named Nin or Ninsen, but Nin is what most people would understand it, who was the mother bull goddess, fertility
Ninhursag too,
goddess.
right?
Yep.
Ninhursag, I think
Yeah, you
too.
could
Yeah.
put that. Yep. But this is post-Diluvian, so this is Nin. Ninkersag is kind of like a parent goddess, consort of Anu, and has all sorts of. There's like three different words in Sumerian that make that all of that up, all interesting, but there's a lot of similarities in God's names as they take pieces of the name, right? And the more words added on, more of their titles, as in Nin Karsag. So post-Diluvian Nin, mother goddess, queen of heaven, uh, mates with Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, to produce Gilgamesh, who is also called a bull, and she's a bull goddess. And when we understand the bulls as being fallen angels or gods, and bulls were also understood as their offspring, as in Gilgamesh, as in the Raphaim and the Ugaritic texts and other civilizations around the world, when they become disembodied, the spirit's offspring, they're spiritual beings, right? The demons.
Yeah.
So roll that into the Bible when Jesus is on the cross and he's being mocked by the bulls of Bashan, all of a sudden it takes on a whole different meaning when we understand Bashan is the region around Mount Hermon and where Gilgal Raphaim would be located
Yeah.
on the foot
It
of
is the
Mount
same
Hermon
place as
in the Golan
Astaroth,
Heights.
right?
Yeah, it
Astaroth
is.
is Bashan. That is the same
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
So Jesus, while he's being crucified, is being mocked by demonic spirits and fallen angels, not in the
Incredible.
pit prison. Yeah.
Incredible. And it's interesting because even going back to Vedic and Sanskrit, when usually when you have a bull or cow reference, it also has to do with rays of light from the sun.
Yeah, it's just interrelated, the two imageries. And again, what I really liked about understanding Astaroth Carname is that it brought the sun disk imagery because it always sits between the horns with the bull cult. It just is that merging of the imageries that, and you see that like in Europe, whenever or in Europe, in Egypt, whenever you see that sun disk, it's sitting in something.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
just what they put it in, and do they fully describe it as a crown
Yeah.
or two horns? And typically, horns were the crowns of the kings in ancient times, right?
Yeah, just like what you described here, they have
Yeah,
the
that's
sun and the
exactly what
horns.
I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, and if everything in Christmas, what I would encourage people to do is research as best you can and decide what you want to participate and not, because a lot of this comes with rituals. So just sort of be careful of it. Now, as we move into the house and into the Christmas tree,
Yes. Let's do this.
so this is an evergreen tree as is being used. And what's important in polytheism is the evergreen tree, specifically a cedar tree. And I'll come back to where that tree comes from, and or a oak, elm, and ash that they use interchangeably. Elm would be probably the more pure form for the world tree. So you have two world trees. One's evergreen, one is a broadleaf and sheds its leaves. Evergreen represents immortality of the gods. The genealogical tree that's used for the world tree is representing reincarnation. When the leaves fall off, you die and then you reincarnate and come back. So those are the two meanings. And the two trees join heaven and earth. And the roots go down into Hades and Sheol, where they receive their genealogical roots from the celestial mafia godfathers and the power for their reign represented in the two trees. Now, this is the cedar of Lebanon in the old imagery for the Christmas tree. And what's important about that is The cedar of Lebanon is one of the major trees in the cedar forest of the Epic of Gilgamesh, located
Yeah.
on Mount Hermon. Just as oak and elm trees were also quite popular there, and not all, but most of the religious ceremonies took place on groves in the Middle East around the mountains. And the groves are part of these trees that are interwoven that we see with the oak tree and the elm and so on and so forth. So this is the cedar of Lebanon. And on that tree, with that tree is the organizational structure and the power that the secret societies use to structure their organization in trees, in trunk organizations and branches that link into them. On the trees, you will have bulbs on there, which would represent, like in Easter, the eggs. It's a fertility image. You're going to put tinsel on there and frostings to represent also the Holly King or the Winter King to make it look more like that. You are going to put a angel or a star at the top of the tree. And typically that looks would seem acceptable, except that we're told not to idolize angels biblically, and that would be probably a fallen star or a fallen angel or Satan in particular that you might be worshiping at the top of the tree and the top of the apex of power, with that also understood dually as the organizational structure of the trunk organizations and branches as they go up. And then typically they would give offerings to the gods and place them under some of those trees or those trees that were cut that would become an altar in the grove and put it around there. And so now that's the representation of the gifts. So not the gifts that St. Nicholas did to the children. You're presenting it to the authority representative structure of this world under the tree with Satan or a fallen angel at the top. So depending on whether it's the council of the gods or Satan that sits above the council of the gods. So this imagery of the Christmas tree that you're bringing into your house, that you're doing a ritual around, the only one I would say is with that I wouldn't get too carried away with is lights. You could look at lights as a representative of the host of heaven. It may be representing that, but that's more of a more recent thing because you wouldn't have put candles in there. It would have burned the tree down. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's more of a modern allegory or lights would be fine. And different colors of lights would represent different aspects of the authorities and religious and governance why of
It's
the
almost
host of
like the
heaven.
lights that represent the elementals and the sprites and everything, you know?
Yeah, and in Freemasonry and the occult, every color has special meanings,
Yeah.
and they get added to as you move up the hierarchy as an adept.
Yeah, very interesting, Gary. It's, and even in a lot of, like the Assyrian moon tree and the Sumerians when they were the Anunnaki around the tree,
Yeah.
that's very similar looking to a Christmas tree as well.
It is. It's so, we don't know exactly what it is. It's either a tree or
Could
a
be
very funny looking tree or a
could be
technology
anything.
to
Yeah.
be looking like a tree. And then they've got these purses or pouches that we have no idea what's in there. And they've got these pine cones or crystals or something in their hands, and they're doing some sort of ritual. But it's
Yeah.
important to these Anunnaki gods for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Definitely interesting, Gary. Love having you on. What else can we get into about Christmas? And I'm trying to think what else we could tie into the Christmas topic. We covered Zoroaster, right? We covered Zoroaster.
Hmm.
Zoroaster also he drinks of a special magnetized water which produces him in a trance that lasts 7 days and 7 nights. And there's very interesting correlations with that, you know.
Yeah, there is, and Zoroaster would be sort of the one that the religion's kind of named after as a famous priest. I think they move his date on this earth way too early or way too late versus earlier. But there would have been priests that would have been named that would have been like a patriarchal title or name of these priests
Yeah,
coming
for
down.
sure.
But certainly the Greeks believed Zoroaster and Mithra were the same or closely related in the beginning of the religions, as they inherited that from the Scythians, and that there was the sun god and also the god of war. So again, you have that destruction of Shiva and that
Yeah.
um, application as the destroyer god, providing all the knowledge and weapon knowledge and strategy and martial arts training and everything else by Azazel, who's also a goat god. So again, trying probably all talking about the same god or group of gods. Um,
Well,
so
correct me if I'm wrong, Gary. Was it Pope Leo the Great that made it birthday of Christ at that date, or am I mistaken?
um, what date do you have on that?
For December the 25th as making it the birthday of Christ. Was
I've
it?
got I've got it down as a different pope.
No,
Um,
I don't remember. I'm just trying to remember if
So
that was.
I have two dates. So 335, Constantine declared Christmas as a date to start recognizing the birth date, and then Julius the First as a pope declared it official in as Jesus's birth. So
Oh, so it was Julius?
yeah, and Aurelia also, had some part in this sort of transition, and Aurelia was around 275, so before the rule of Constantine. And he made it official uh, as the birth date with Christ as well on December 25 as as what Constantine later did. But it wasn't. I mean, he doesn't doesn't do it in like a law or a legislative commandment or anything like that, but it sort of starts that process and moving it forward. So there could be other people involved on it as well, but it's definitely those are the ones I pulled out of research books for people who
Yeah.
were the major influencers on it.
The chat room is interested about the Advent, what you think about the Advent.
Have them define the Advent for a
Um, every Sunday candle before Christmas on the Advent made of what is it? I can't read what they wrote there. I meant so all the four are lit the last Sunday before Christmas.
Yeah, so that's a week before Christmas. That's why I wanted that clearly.
Yeah,
I understood what they're doing on that. So that's going to put that at December 17th to 18th, which is the beginning of Saturna, the sun
yeah,
god. And those lights would represent the sun god and the knowledge that they're providing. So I think that's the relationship there.
very
That's
interesting.
been put on the Advent starting as a um, way of putting Christian gloss on a polytheist celebration. You could also
What
look at that as part of this Sol Invictus, but Sol Invictus really starts on December 25 with the birthday of Mithra as well. So I'm looking more of that as Saturna.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Well, Gary, it's been an intense show. Love the information that you bring
Yeah.
always.
Okay.
Uh, I can't wait to have you back on again. What else can we get into today? You have anything else to add before we
Yeah,
go?
I'll just add a few more points
Yeah.
on Mithraism and the merging of Christianity and a few important terms and
Yeah,
names.
we could
So,
get into other topic. We got some time because I think we
yep,
started a little like about an hour ago.
yep.
Yeah,
So the leader of the Mithraic religion was known as the Pater, which is Latin for father, just as Father Christmas, Father Mithra, and the priests accepted the titles accordingly, and they also wore crosses as well, but these are more the ancient style of cross that would come out of Sumerian, just as we see. It's almost more like a Maltese cross from its ancient sort of look, or it could have also been an Ankh. So there's a bit of debate on that. There was just a couple other things. There was a Mithraic Trinity, which again is an interesting way that you can form, relationships between the two imageries being done by Constantine of Mithraic religion and Christianity. So Mithra, Rashnu, and Vohu Mana were the three of the Trinity of Mithraism, and you can see some very strong Sanskrit relationships there. And I won't go into the detail of that. Just wanted to point that out that that was the Trinity. And you have a trimartite in Hinduism as well that has the three majors from ancient times as
Yeah, they
well.
even have tetrads in all of them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Sunday was Mithra's holy day, um, and understood as Sol Invictus. Sunday was also the rest day derived from the Roman blue laws, as they called it, enforced through the empire, versus the Saturday. So that also was a good legitimate reason for uniting the empire as well. Um, December 25, Mithra's birthday, was understood as Natalis Invictus. And if you want to understand how we get to the nativity scene, you get there through the
Wow. Yeah.
transliteration of Natalis.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah. So the followers of Mithricism, they entered paradise through thinking the good thought, speaking the good word, and performing good deeds, which is why, not that you shouldn't do it, and if you have the spirit in it, was why the Roman Church puts so much emphasis on doing good deeds.
That's incredible. That's really interesting.
And finally, the Mithraic cult supported the divine right of kings to reign.
That's incredible. So what do you feel also about what we talked about at the very beginning of the show? All this activity that's happening. Do you think it's angelic activity and angels are waking up and coming here or activating some kind of tech or working even with our military?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is a lot of the elementals in this. So, in book one, I talk about three groups of elementals. In book two, I get to the salamanders, which is a larger group of reptilians. But when we look at the spurious offspring, we see a strong relationship, or I see a strong relationship with many of the aliens that have these types of capabilities, and that they've been with us forever, and that, fairies would come through portals, fairy domens, as we talked about as portals earlier with their flying machine technology. And they would kidnap people throughout the ages and do similar things to what aliens do in terms of sexual experimentation
Yeah.
and all that. It's exactly the same story. And there's three groups of little ones called elementals. And these are the mischievous ones. They're like leprechauns and pixies and brownies and groups like that. And these are part of the trickster spirit of the demonic realm versus the trickster spirit of the angelic realm. All interconnected in the hierarchy, but different levels. And then you have the little ones, which are good looking ones, like Neroids and sprites and mermaids and like what's pictured in picture Peter Pan with, I'm trying to think of the little one that's good looking. It doesn't matter. People get the message. And then you have the ugly ones, which are like, you know, dark elves depicted in the Christmas thing. You have goblins, which are located underneath, and trolls. Trolls are underneath bridges or guardians to portals and things like that. We also have like the gnomes, which possess the technology of the hierarchy in the visible world and the genealogies, and had these flying machine capabilities that will come through these portals. And the gnomes, there's a specific rank of gnomes, and there's probably just variations of different ones, but they're called the gray gnomes and the grays. And I
Yeah.
put two descriptions of those in book one with the abductions. And if you didn't know it was a fairy abduction, you would swear it was a gray alien abduction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the aliens are more interdimensional travelers than
I
intergalactic
agree.
travelers from all of the information that we get. And so I think we're going to see a higher presence of these ones until we actually start to see some of the fallen angels walk amongst us again.
Yeah, I mean, you find the story all over fairy encounters in the past where they'll say some sort of fairy took the form of one of the most beautiful women you could possibly imagine, and
Yeah,
then seduces a man, and they have a child, and then the fairy leaves and goes
yeah.
back to its.
So for Christians out there,
It's
we
like the
get,
story of Phyllis Boa. But you ever see that guy Antonio Boas from Brazil?
yep,
That
yep,
story
yep,
where a woman seduced him and from
yeah,
the stars and leaves.
yeah.
Same
I
story.
mean, all sorts of different kinds of that type of encounters from
Yep.
this hierarchy of spurious ones. And so for Christians to saying, well, fairies and elementals aren't in the Bible, well, that's not quite true. So Galatians 4, 3, and 9 list elementals. It's the Greek word stoichion. And it can mean in some other passages in the Bible, the basic elements of the universe, but here it's the elementals that enslave us in the physical world. And inanimate objects don't enslave us. This is a type of being. And in Colossians 2, 8 and 20, it's the rudiments that's translated for the same Greek word stoichion for elementals. So again, it's just not consistency in the translation there. These are
Yeah.
elementals, and the elementals are the lowest level in the visible hierarchy of the spurious ones. And so,
We're wielding these fairy wands, these
yeah,
cell phones. They're literally fairy wands.
they are because it's when we look at sorcery and magic, it is as much not as chemistry as it is technology. And you have to have technology to make things work like magic wands because it's going to have energy and
Wow.
other stuff connected to it,
It's
right?
so it's so right there too. Like, I mean, and what does this all these cell phones and this technology do? Just preoccupies us from being spiritual.
Yes.
That's all it does.
And it starts to create a common connection amongst everybody,
Yep.
which gets to be really at the core of the hive mind. And
Really, it's
when we
true.
start thinking about what they were talking about at last year's Davos meeting, um, that they said within 10 years they were going to have the ability through technology for us to be able to interconnect with each other without speaking. And then you have all of this stuff coming out on the Neuralink that Musk is developing, along with
So
AI. And
crazy. That's just
so,
gonna have like the AI feed right to your head. Like you're gonna be able to ask Google a question in your head.
yeah,
Like what?
yeah.
Like that's
And
crazy.
and then that's going to, and this is all to put in place their ability to bring in the chip system that they announced that they wanted to do in 2017 and 18. When I say they, it's that Davos cruise, which intersects into the Committee of 300 in the trunk organizations of the thelemic evergreen tree that we were talking about earlier in terms of the hierarchy. And that's 300 families, as that's understood. So, and they needed one of the biggest concerns last year in Davos is they needed AI to be developed at a faster rate because it was holding up this whole implant system that they want to put in. And that's going to be our connection between everything in the world and other dimensions, and also to do internal, right down to the quantum level, not therapeutic, but medical applications. They want to be able to take it right down to the gene level and below to cure diseases and things like that. So, as you see the introduction of the technological medical bed, that's part of that technology that's going to be attached to that as well.
Yeah, well, we're gonna see. I think we're at the cusp of some big changes on Earth as well
We
in
are. We
2025.
are. Yep.
Possibly a solar event, who knows? Well, we're gonna try to bring the message as long as we can, Gary. I
Yeah, and
appreciate you coming here.
and it's about putting information into people's hands and people making their own decisions because it's going to get very confusing. And you're going to get down to a couple of simple choices as they boil this down and we get closer to the nexus point of what they're trying to bring about. And so you need to make intelligent decisions. And as we've talked about in past shows, no decision is still a decision. So learn
Yeah.
as much as you can.
Yeah, that would be a great Gary Wayne shirt too. I always said that. One of your shirts. We had over 50 people in the chat room, so I appreciate you guys coming by today. Once again, this is Gary Wayne, Genesis6Conspiracy.com. I'm gonna go live back at 3 p.m. guys, Eastern. It's 2:30 right now. Gary, thanks for joining me. It's really a
Yep.
pleasure.
Thank you for bringing me on. And just so that people know where to go if they want to get a hold of me or read about some of my books, it's Genesis6Conspiracy.com, the Genesis 6 number 6Conspiracy.com. And I've done some more upgrades on the website as things sort of develop with my research. And also, the Audible book is now out for book two. Came out a couple, 3 weeks ago and is doing well. So now both my books are available in, soft cover print, digital on Kindle, and on Amazon Audible the for both books as well. And there's links over to those on Amazon for the Kindle version and for the Audible version right from the website now. And then also have a bundling page for purchasing. That's on page 3 on the Buy Now page.
You guys can see right up at the screen, we got his website, the Genesis 6, that's the number 6conspiracy.com. You guys can check my YouTube. We have a long archive of shows with Gary and I and all sorts of free information here. Gary, it's a pleasure. Have a
Yeah,
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll talk to you
absolutely.
soon.
And for people who can see it, you can see that's a depiction of Atlantis as
Yes, that we were
in the
talking
wheel.
about.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. It looks good, Gary. I like this on the site now. Looks good.
Thank you.
All right, happy New Year, everybody. Merry Christmas. We'll see you live soon. Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and you can find me at the Mystical Spiral store. Spiral out.